And it's always fun to watch the tours around your gardens and all of the places where you practice your care of plants, whether it's inside your garden or in the world of garden.
Good stuff.
Um, as those of us here who like we're organizing and talking amongst ourselves discussed, I don't have prepared sort of series of questions. Um, ahead of time, but there was a few pieces that really sort of jumped out that I'm going to sort of throw back at you as the panelists. And it was sort of funny because I was writing this down, and then Tiffany got to her last slide there, and it was like ownership, and I'm like, funny, that's what I was just writing down, because there's actually a really strong topic of ownership that ties in with what all of you just talked about. And sort of, I think at the bottom of that it's being expressed in different ways in different spaces, but that a big chunk of ownership, beyond whether, being about the right to exploit land if you own it, is that it's perceived as a right to dictate what life is permitted into or excluded from a piece of land. And that's being expressed in a lot of different ways. And I don't know if any of you would like to, well, I'll invite all of you to speak to it. Would anybody like to go first? Go ahead and unmute. Somebody go ahead and unmute. Elia, it looks like you really have something you want to say there.
I guess I'll just frame everyone else's conversations about land ownership and property ownership with like just a statement of the fact that private property is a colonial construct. Like Indigenous people do not have that. Many cultures do not have those, do not have that conception of owning space and being able to dictate exactly what goes on between it or within it. And so I think when you think about like the forces at play within our society right now that we're hopefully trying to work against, you have capitalism, you have racism, you have anti-Blackness and anti-Indigenous. And I think the thing about private property is that it's all kind of wrapped up in this, in that one issue. Like, this land was not empty when European people got here. It was stolen, and then it was given to white people, and then sold from one population of Indigenous people and given to another, and just stolen. So I think like it is the original sin, so to speak, and we're kind of dealing with the aftermath of that sin never being corrected or never being made right.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very much, and we've built a whole economy and everything up off of that, and so yeah, we've got a lot of work to do because it's not, as Tiffany said, it's not about land back isn't about making everybody leave, or decolonization isn't about making everybody leave, but there's a lot of work that does need to be done on a really structural level. And I see Tiffany, you've unmuted. So
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Aaliyah for that. I think it's this idea of wildness and the untamed vast, and you still hear people talking about, oh, BC is so huge, it's got all this space. It's like, well, it's there for a reason. And I look at the work of different land conservancies and land trusts, and while I feel that some of them do, they really want to do right by preserving agricultural land, which I feel is important to get rid of that inequity between, the settler and, BIPOC people that want to get into farming and feed their communities and feed those that are definitely in need. But where I see there being some issues and maybe where I get maybe my back up a little bit is when creating these, conserved areas, who's dictating who conserves that? And is it further dispossessing Indigenous peoples from their land, their unceded land already? So it's, I don't have the answer, but I really would love to just name that And I think that's a really important point that you made, Aaliyah, is that, they see this wild land and they start divvying it up and selling it off to people to farm this land. And really what that has done is that has really shifted the power in the other hand. But power is not even the right word. I always like to look at language. It's not the power. It's just definitely created that bigger rift in equity.
Very much so. So Lorraine?
Yeah, I think definitely that kind of foundational idea critique runs through everything that we've been talking about. And I want to thank Aaliyah and Tiffany for your presentations, and also for your comments about this question of ownership. I note as well that someone in the chat Nancy Ward has said, ownership is a foundational concept to what undermines capitalism. And, that is the big overarching thing here. And until so much is transformed, there will be there will be all of those problems. But I guess one thing that occurs to me is, while we're smashing capitalism, let's replace the language of ownership with the language of care. Like, let's just do that, and let's encourage everyone else to do that. And while we're smashing capitalism and all the rest, I think it would actually create I think it would do something, actually. I think that change, that language of care and getting rid of the language of ownership. And I guess the other thing I just wanted to add had to do with, I guess, again, while, while we're smashing capitalism, work on access while that change is happening, like really focus on access. So as a very practical and tangible change that can be made right away, while the whole system needs to be changed.
Thank you. That kind of, you just keep setting them up for me. This is perfect. Because one of the other things I jotted down while through the talks is that it's sort of funny, because abundance is something that most people, if you say abundance, they're like, yes, abundance sounds lovely. But abundance is actually really threatening to a lot of systems at a lot of spaces. Thinking of abundance of diversity and abundance of people and abundance of life is just really scary and not very controlled. And that's something that I don't know if anyone wants to speak to, or I'll sort of put it to the panel, that yeah, just the idea of how we're excluding abundance from spaces, and maybe how we could actually start thinking about, how do we invite abundance into, and that's diversity, that's complexity, because even abundance. Something Tiffany said when you were showing your garden, and it was all that sort of early stage and everything was clean lines, and then you went, it's all good. It all goes to seed later. And I'm like, and as somebody who's a seed collector these days, I'm like, gone to seed, awesome. I mean, I collect everything and it's great. But gone to seed means something very different to a lot of people. It means it's messy and it's no longer sort of worthwhile. And I'm like, and that's that fear of abundance. So would you like to expand on, or sort of have a take on abundance, and maybe how we could encourage the acceptance and celebration of abundance instead of its exclusion?
Yeah, well, I can jump in. I love that. Yeah, gone to seed, I guess, can be seen as a bad thing. I mean, when I see it, I call that seed rich. Like, that is exponential growth and exponential future food. And to me, I think of this idea, almost when you use the analogy, when my cup runneth over, then I have something to give. You can look at that not even just from your own mental health and your own heartfulness, but actually with the abundance that you're growing or you're collecting, you're harvesting, you're making, you're creating. And that's why I wrote in the chat this idea of the solidarity economy. This is, when people hear economy, that's like, yeah, jobs and capitalism. Well, I mean, I think we need to be sort of taking back those terms and turning them into something beautiful. Like this is, community solidarity. This is caring for each other. I was actually thinking about this earlier when I was outside for this presentation. I was like trying to think around those words of, transcending and that transition away from this current system. And it really is this idea that, we need to crush that individualism. So that's the other piece of capitalism, is to be able to crush this individualism. No one person can do this themselves. And I'm living proof that no one person you get burnt out. So we need to start lifting each other up when we're able. When that cup runneth over, then we need to be gifting out, or we need to be offering our time. We need to be offering our energy. We need to be offering our land. We need to, all of these things, because it's that reciprocal, it's that reciprocity, like the idea that we need to get back into that again. I help you when you're feeling a bit low, and not expecting that you're going to help me when I'm low. It is definitely a bit of a tongue tie in your mind to decolonize that feeling of, well, if I help you, you have to help me. It's definitely a tricky one, but I look at that abundance thing as a really good thing, because when I see abundance, that means that I can feed myself. I'm going back to just like my basic needs of, I can feed myself, but not only can I feed myself, I can feed my uncle who had bad luck with hunting this year. And that's all attuned to climate change and encroaching on animal spaces by industry. I was lucky. I help him when he's down. So yeah, that's how I kind of think of it with the abundance.
When everyone else is well, you become well. It's sort of a thing. And everything else is unwell, we become unwell. Aaliyah?
Yeah,
I was going to say Aaliyah or Elaine, but Aaliyah, you're quick.
I really agree with everything that Tiffany said about, like moving away from the concept of individualism and individual gain and individual benefit and towards collective benefit. But on the topic of abundance, I just think that if we look at who has power and who is abundant in property and in capital and in power over other people with the ability to make decisions, I think it's, a lot of the times I feel like developers like to make excuses for why they can't give more. Oh, well, I can't give more because look, I just gave you, 600 units of housing. Like, what more do you want? But when we look at, what the CEOs of these companies are making, when we look at everything that they extract from our communities and like, then we look at everything they give, I think the dynamic is just really off balance, to say the least. So I think it's also about looking at the people who have abundance and calling them out to say, like, you are okay, you have everything that you need, and let's make sure that everyone else can say the same before you get to build, set of luxury condos number 3. So yeah. Also, Lorraine, your earrings are so great.
Thank you.
And go ahead if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I was going to say, Lorraine, do you want to?
Okay.
Abundance?
Yeah, I actually I'm going to replace every reference that I've ever made using the awkward word of fecundity, which is horrible to say, and with abundance, which overflows. It really is the same idea, really. abundance. And I don't really have anything to add to what Elia and Tiffany have said, except I do think that we need to understand that that I think absolutely to pinpoint that there's definitely a thread out there around threat and a feeling of threatened, a feeling of being threatened by the whole notion of abundance. And I think we have to understand that. And I honestly don't. I don't understand it. But what Tiffany and Aaliyah have gestured towards has really, I'm going to think about it a lot more in the kind of political aspects of abundance and whose interests are. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that.
There's something I'll see if I can find it while somebody's saying something, if I can find it really quickly, but there's actually a really good, not widely shared yet, write-up somebody did on the what the purposes of the scarcity narrative is. And actually it delves into some history way back to when the Dutch went into Africa. Like it's that far back. It's why we write the scarcity narrative and how it's being reinforced through research and publications and everything, just to reinforce this narrative, because it catches our attention and it keeps us engaged and keeps us consuming, frankly. So I've got a question in the chat, and then somebody's asked if they can ask a question as well, because we've got we usually wrap up at around 90 minutes, so we've got a little bit of time left, and it's not a hard end. But Abraham asked if he could ask a question. Did you want to go ahead and do that, Abraham? He just said.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. I guess I want to start by just thanking the panelists. Each one of you have certainly brought great insight. And I think a lot of what's been said around ownership and abundance and individualism in particular are all, great ways to sort of conceptualize and understand the challenges and the work that lies ahead. I guess I want to maybe sort of open discussion, or, wondering what people's thoughts are on sort of understanding, decolonization in the framework or in the context, I guess, of urban spaces. And Aaliyah, obviously you touched on that in your presentation around privately owned public spaces, which, are a very explicit example of colonialism around controlling land and owning land. And, with cities being, so colonized and so, whether it's land speculation and there's so many rules and regulations around how land is used. And I guess I'm just wondering, what does that work, how do you see that work looking like, or how are, maybe a better way to phrase it, or what are sort of things that we can do, or I can do, I guess, as a settler, as an ally, to sort of support that work in an urban context? Because when I think of privately owned space, I mean, obviously, we can make those spaces public, but, I don't know if that's necessarily a solution, because obviously the state is very oppressive in a lot of ways. And we can see that now in Toronto, right, where, lots of public spaces aren't accessible to all kinds of folks and are very controlling and oppressive. So I know it's a very difficult and a big topic, but I'm just wondering if there's any kind of suggestions or thoughts on, I guess, understanding that work in an urban context.
Aaliyah, did you want to?
I guess I'll start by saying one thing. How do I phrase this? Also, hi Abram, love you. I guess I just want to say that, like, we need to be mindful that the things that colonialism built sometimes cannot be decolonized. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know if there is a version of cities that are like completely decolonized. And I don't know if we have like a vision of that in our brains. At least I can say that I don't. I'm not Indigenous, so it's not really my place to say too much, but like some things are always going to be colonial. And so if we are going to look at ways to make the city better, I think we need to untie the idea of like every single thing needing to profit and every single thing needing to make a buck. And so I think the thing about pops that kind of stuck out for me, but this applies to so many other things, is like, if cities need money to function, the things that don't make money are just going to fall like lower and lower and lower down the list of priorities. So we need to stop thinking, I was talking to my partner about this yesterday, like, we need to untie ourselves from like, this needs to make money and this needs to be productive and this needs to be, economical and all those things. And like, are we cared for? Is this going to sustain our planet in the long term? Are you making sure that those who are most marginalized are being taken care of and that their needs are met and that we're making the world better for them and therefore for all of us? And so I think it's less about like, how do we decolonize cities, and more about like, how can we make our cities better, more just, more caring, more sustainable? Like, how can we, I guess that's less colonial, but like, white people came, stole this land and said indigenous people get out. Like, they built it on colonialism. So yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily possible.
Yeah, there's some pretty deep level changes that need to happen. I don't know, Tiffany, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I just added production and productions into our list of Bobo words.
Yes. I
Yeah,
literally have a list.
Oh yeah. Just it's when I think of seeds and I think of plants and animals, and to have them referred to as commodities and these productionist mindsets, it definitely makes my tummy churn a little bit. But it's from my lens, right? And it's as Aaliyah said, all of these systems and cities and the way that our economy was built on destruction and dispossession and death and genocide and everything else, all these really horrible words. But I really do see that over time, if we are making those efforts toward that just transition, and start looking at more of those solidarity economies, start looking at more of that equity of everything, the equity of abundance, I guess. Like, I think we can be in a better place, but yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think there's an overnight, or even in my lifetime, fix for what we've done.
Lorraine, did you have something?
Yeah, I think I really take to heart what you said, Aaliyah, about can you always expect to decolonize something that is built through colonization? And maybe you need to ask a different question. And so I guess one of the ways I think it won't necessarily answer your question, Abram, about what does decolonization look like in a framework of urban spaces, but the idea, that's sort of what I was getting at when I was talking about access. So if it's not necessarily decolonization, but but access, like working on access, and access through an equity lens, so that all BIPOC and under-resourced groups and those most marginalized, et cetera, like that there is access within our cities for for those who have been excluded or marginalized to experience the abundance. Yeah.
So the abundance flows to those who have less as opposed to those who have more?
Exactly.
Because currently the system is designed to flow towards those who have more as opposed to those who have less. I've described it as black hole capitalism. The more you have, the more you draw in. And that's the version of capitalism we're running, as opposed to oak tree capitalism, which is the more you have, the more you share. I'll write an article on it sometime.
I want to add one more thing. Just I was listening to a talk by I think her name is Vicky Osterhoff. I might be pronouncing her last name wrong, but I'll look up and post in the chat after. But she wrote a book called In Defense of Looting that takes a really good look, and I need to buy it. Just at private property and how it came to be, and like really examining it from like a global lens, which is great. But one thing that they said in their talk that has kind of stuck with me is that like to make these radical changes that we want to make, like we have to get used to the idea that things are going to be messy, and that things are like not going to look the way we might want them to look, or feel the way we might want them to feel, or the way we are used to them feeling. Because yeah, like one thing about this, settler society that we live in is that we can say that it's organized and to some degree orderly. And I think when people, exactly like our gardens, I think when people we need to embrace the concept and idea that things are not necessarily going to be orderly, and that doesn't make it bad. Mess can be good, wildness can be good. Like these things are great. They're just different from what we have now, and that's fine.
Yes, we have a culturally instilled fear of disorder, and I'm like, I think if we're going to make it, we're going to have to get over that one. Yes, thank you, Abram, for your question, because it was a very thoughtful and on-topic question. We have a couple more in here that might be sort of, in some ways, they're more practical as opposed to the larger theoretical ones, so they might be a bit quicker. Although this one is kind of a big one. Abundance has connotations of wealth and more than enough. How do we understand abundance in the context of growth? Our planet is finite, humans are not. I have so much editorializing I could do here. I'll send it to the panelists first. Anybody want to take that? Nobody want to run with that one? Lorraine?
I was just going to say, like we collectively create those connotations, we can, like, I actually, I don't associate abundance with necessarily with more than enough, if that's meant in a negative way, because more than enough also means the generosity of the world, of everything. So I think it might in some ways be an attitude shift, really. Although I take the part where of the question, I think what you're gesturing towards, Bev, is this idea of unfettered growth being destroying the planet, but I don't think a notion of abundance is the problem. The unfettered growth not tied to the ecological reality, social reality, everything else. That's the problem. Unfettered growth tied to capitalism, for example, like that's the problem.
Thank you. I'm just going to go ahead and go on. Yes, as far as humans are not being finite, birth rates have actually fallen down to replacement rate. The only thing growing our population right now is we're living longer. So we're not quite as infinite as we seem sometimes. There's another one here from Brian. Many urban gardeners go shopping every spring for plants, manure, and other fertilizers and bagged topsoil. We become used to consuming these garden ingredients from elsewhere rather than cultivating self-sufficiency. I'm told I'm troubled. Sorry, I've got too many things open here, and it's not giving me enough screen space to read the comment there. I'm troubled by the topsoil extracted from elsewhere, impoverishing that place in order to enrich our gardens, rather than taking responsibility for composting to keep feeding our soil. Does anyone want to do a comment on that?
Yeah, I might jump in just from my own personal lens, and of course, to really name the privilege that I have, because I am a landowner. I do have the privilege of having animals that live alongside me. I've got a couple of crazy horses, a donkey, and a mule. Every now and then we raise our own pigs. We have chickens. And I'm actually going to be participating in a soil research project that's actually going to be testing the benefits of each of those different inputs in a closed system. So it's probably been tested before, but we're looking to test the fact that our critters here are actually eating perennial forage, like right here on the land, and nothing is an outside input. Obviously, that is not something that everyone can do. Again, recognizing the privilege that I have here. However, what I'm trying to do is curate a project around ways that we can possibly be looking to communities supporting communities, meaning, you know, maybe those inputs are brought in from closer instead of, you know, removing peat from the bogs and the muskeg, and maybe using, because a lot of people are into this, you know, regenerative agriculture, having animals on their land, but maybe we can be doing that closer to home. And really, so what I've done is I've scaled down this project. They wanted to do a really large area of land. I said, absolutely not. If I'm going to have this Indigenous led, it's going to be on a smaller plot that I can do myself with my own animals and everything else. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But that is a really big question, because, you know, when you want to grow more food or grow food to be feeding other people, the notion is we need to, you know, be bringing in all these outside inputs. And I think, yeah, I mean, the point about encouraging composting on site is definitely something that we need to start educating people on better. And I'm hoping that projects such as mine and other projects will help inform those decisions a little bit better. As much as I'd love to say that my Indigenous ways of knowing should be listened to a little bit more, because this is the way that we've done it for a really long time, we're going to try and blend some Western science with that. So stay tuned.
Yes, looking forward to that.
I guess to pick up on what I see Rhonda talking about in the chat about community composting. Yes, big yes. Community composting is really amazing. I think it's a really easy way to get people more in tune with the food system. If they're like, wow, my food scraps can turn into compost, and then gardeners can use that compost and they can turn into flowers and veggies. Like, I think compost is really magical. So I'm actually working with a group of people to start community composting in downtown Kitchener. And I think that, like, it's a pretty like low entry point if people want to start it in community gardens in their neighborhoods and their areas. Like, I really encourage you to look into an organization called BK Rot, which is in Brooklyn. They're great and awesome. So yes, big yes to community composting.
And if anybody wants to actually do a full business scale version, check out some of the stuff Compost Montreal does, because that idea of bringing resources into the city for soil nutrients, the cities are the most concentrated place in the world for nutrient density. We're just disposing of it rather than capturing it. So there are lots of ways, and that would also actually deal with a lot of the peat moss things. A lot of our peat moss used to be replaced with urban compost. We are at 8:30, so if it's okay with everybody, I am going to go ahead and say we can wrap up, but do remember, and because I'm more articulate sometimes when I write it down, each of these sessions in this series is paired with a gathering session 2 weeks after the learning session, so 2 weeks from this evening. The format of the gathering is it's a gathering or a conversation where we can bring our thoughts and ideas that we'd like to discuss or share with the whole group. Registering for this, session automatically registers you for participating in that session. So it'll be on the 24th. It's the same Zoom link, but I will send out a reminder email to all the registered participants sort of the day before, just to remind you that there's something. So if you've got all these ideas bubbling around in your head and you're all like, I want to talk to somebody about this idea, or hey, I finally found my people, because this is all people who came to a room to have a conversation about these issues, as opposed to just whatever the newest exotic plant was that's coming onto the market next year that you must have. So there's a chance to connect at more of a full group level, and also if it's like there's a thing I've been thinking about and I'm just stuck, bring that too. You know, you've got a room full of people who are interested in these things. So yes, thank you very much, everybody, for coming and participating tonight. Thank you, Lorraine and Tiffany and Aaliyah for sharing your thoughts and your ideas. That was wonderful. And of course, since I have access to the full recording, I'm promptly going to go back and watch it for all the stuff I missed while I was answering questions in the chat and things like that. We will be posting or sharing some bits as approved by the speakers. So for the full participants, you'll get an email in a week or two. I'm going to go ahead and save the chat. So I have a copy of it, but if there's links in there that anybody wants, please go ahead, quickly go and save the chat, the little 3 dots in there. And yes, thank you very much, everybody, for taking your Thursday afternoon or evening, depending on which time zone you're coming in from, to think about these big, important topics. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Kukshan. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Have a good night.
Good night.